life is hard. Relationships are hard.
Yeah.
If you're doing life right.
Yeah, friendships are hard. There's going to be misunderstandings and, fallouts and phases of ups and downs. And, you got to.
And that fact that it's hard is not like something wrong with it. It's that idea that the greater the good, the more difficult it is to attain. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like Aquinas talks about that. I mean, that's just like part of the law of nature, I guess you could say.
Welcome to the Inspirit podcast from Amoris Christi. Join us as we explore current events and all manner of fascinating topics and explore their connections to Christian living.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Inspirit podcast. I'm joined again by Father Thomas and Chris. Welcome, guys. And thought today we'll talk about the topic of friendship. But before that, how's you guys been? Been, I think, a couple of weeks since we got together. And I know we had a couple of episodes on this new set, but just want to see how your week was. Checking in.
Really good. Good week.
Yeah.
That's great. Had a really busy week. Most of the country is experiencing a kind of crazy freezing weather right at the moment as we're recording this. And my job, the company I work for, is based in a really cold part of the country, or at least it's cold right now. It's not normally cold. So
okay. Well, it is pretty cold right here too. We're at 57. Right? Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Actually, I stepped outside and as I was getting to my car from my front door, I literally went, ugh. Just because it was like the cold and wet feeling.
Anthony, what is the threshold at which you start to shiver?
I think it's below 60, yeah.
Below 60? I don't know. I feel like it's below 75.
He actually starts shivering.
Yeah, it is pretty rough.
It's not like fake. He actually shivers.
But I do.
I feel like the threshold's higher.
Your threshold's higher?
No, your threshold.
I guess maybe you get used to it eventually. I don't know. But I was hoping that it'll get a little bit more colder so the iguanas will start falling down. But it's pretty cool to see that.
I remember this one time I went on a vacation, and it was like in the dead of winter in December, and I went to England, and I stopped in a place to eat, and the guy behind the counter said oh, so where are you from? And I said, oh, I'm in Florida. And he was like, and you came to England in winter?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, we live in the heat all the time. So for me anyway, cold weather is kind of like vacation mode. And he just looked at me like I had three heads. That must have been it was like it was the craziest thing you ever heard. But I love the cold weather. So
it's good to know. Good to know, Chris. All right. I mean, I guess, just the topic of friendship, it's something that we here at Amoris Christi have done some research on with the Institute for Excellence, and it's our first topic for research. But I think it's such a relevant topic just in the world today of finding meaningful relationships and connections, and how friendships have been such a blessing for us, I think, in our lives too. So I just want to explore what do you guys kind of think about like friendships and how they've been beneficial to you in your own lives, and just even on a human level,
I think one of the interesting things about just talking about the idea of friendship is it's such an intuitive concept for so many of us. Like, to even say that the Institute conducted a study on friendship is like, okay, well, what does that mean? Because we all know what friends are, or at least in our minds implicitly we seem to know what friends are. And we'll use all kinds of different words like, it's somebody I care about, it's a connection, it's a certain kind of relationship. But then to really drill down and get to the specifics, I'm sure that's what we'll explore and discuss. I think for me, I don't know if I have a well-formulated elevator speech of what friendship is, but I know that for me in my life, it's one of the most rewarding types of relationships that I've ever experienced. It's also comes with its difficulties for sure, especially when it's a real and true friendship. But it's something that every day I just find gives my life blessing. What about you, Father?
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think what makes friendship special, or where it attains the highest level to me, is where it really becomes, in a sense, an end in itself. That doesn't mean you don't have some other objective together or sense of purpose or direction and all of that. You probably do with friends. But I mean like time spent, you know.
Yeah.
You have a phrase that you always use about, what is it, wasting time or something like that?
Yeah, from the
right?
Holy
You're
Father.
big on
Yeah.
Oh, it's the Holy Father.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's like, I should probably know, but no, it's, what does that mean? Wasting time. Obviously, you're not really actually wasting time. It's that it's an activity that doesn't have some external objective. Like being together is the objective. It's the end in itself.
Right.
You know, and I think when that can be experienced in relationship, it has this relativizing power. Like so many of the other things can seem so vain or shallow. Many of the things that we end up pursuing and spending all of our energy for, you know, they get relativized and you're like, what's life really about? And it's like, sometimes you think it's about these beautiful relationships that I have, you know, and friendship being one that's chief among them.
Yeah. No, even when you think about like, what's the difference between like a friend and like a colleague or a coworker or like a social acquaintance or something like that. You know, a lot of times with these other categories, as you mentioned, when you get together, it's, you know, maybe to accomplish some task because maybe you're on a team together at work, or you have some sort of common interest, like, oh, you are part of like, I don't know, a chess club or a pickleball team or whatever. But then with a friend, and I think this is what gets at the heart of that idea of like someone you can waste time with together. You don't need that thing. You don't need that sort of common activity or sort of common goal, like professional terms. Your goal is each other. Your goal is to simply be present to one another.
Yeah, and I remember, I guess the former Surgeon General, now Dr. Murthy, reading the book together, and for him, friendship was an important part of him getting out of depression, you know, during when he was training and everything. But he quotes a beautiful line which says like, friendship is not what you do for each other, but it's about what you become in the presence of each other, right? Yeah.
Oh, that's neat.
So, so it's like, then I always think of that, right? It's like when I'm with my friends and when I'm with you guys, it's like, it's not about what is Chris doing for me or what is Father Thomas doing for me. It's what we all become in the presence of each other. And I always think of that. And I think like even in our research, I think the foundation for that for me is, you know, the Gaudium et Spes, where man is a social animal and man finds himself by a sincere gift of himself towards others, right? And I think that's what, when I think of friendship, you know, that's what I think that in a way, when I give myself to another, when I'm being intentional about wasting time with my friends, you know, in a way, I also find who I am too.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because like another quote that I thought of as you were saying that was this, like, you know, how we'll often say marriage is about two becoming one, how marriage is two souls become joined in one body, like spiritually, analogically, not literally. But how friendship has been described as sort of the opposite, that it's like one soul in two bodies. Again, this is analogy, not literal, but even Saints Basil and Gregory, I think, referred to their friendship that way as they were like one soul in two bodies, because they felt so linked, so deeply connected in just their sharing in each other's lives. And when I even think just about friendship in my own terms, I think one of the simpler ways that I can phrase it, I suppose, is friendship is about like rejoicing in another person. Like a friend is someone whose life like I can take joy in for no practical benefit to myself. And I think there are practical benefits for yourself too, but that's not your primary intention. Right. The intention is not that I get something out of it, but simply rejoicing in the other. Sharing in the joys and struggles.
Yeah, and I think you know, I think also like as you're sharing that, also I think what that ability to rejoice in the others, that ability to, you know, be with the other person and, you know, be together. I think it's essential for our Christian journey too. You know, like in our we're not meant to like journey alone in a way, you know. It's always together as a community, the apostles together. And so I think there's something, you know, inherent in who we are, that we're meant to in a way belong to each other and find who we are together, right? What do you guys think?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of like the search for fulfillment and meaning in life, right? And that takes you in many different ways. Like, I think most people start out with some kind of a social background as children. You know, you play together and your kind of life is deeply entrenched in a social environment, right?
Yeah.
In school and such. But it's interesting that as we get older, I do think that, at least today, in this day and age, people tend to become more and more isolated. Now, you can't go back to the childhood types of friendship, you know, because they're not really very deeply personal. You know, you don't actually know the soul of another person in a sense. So there has to be like just like you grow in depth and maturity, hopefully through the years, friendship also has to grow in substance over the years in order for it to last and for it to be suitable for the later stages of life. But I don't think that many people experience that.
Yeah.
You know? And that's why I think that there was such great interest when we did research the topic of friendship, because so many people feel so alone.
Yeah.
And they don't really feel like they have close friends, especially like middle-aged people and things like that. And so
yeah, there's this epidemic of loneliness, as it's been called. And I'm even thinking of certain sectors on the internet where people will talk about how now there's like almost the stereotype of the middle to late 20-something-year-old, especially male, who's just completely lonely and just might have social connections but no real friends.
Yeah.
And I suppose, like, what do you guys think? Like, are we losing the art of making friends today?
Yeah. So I do actually want for us to talk a little bit about what loneliness looks like today.
Yeah.
Kind of the unique forms that it takes. Because you know how sometimes things come up on your YouTube and then you're kind of interested a little bit. So you watch a little bit, then it gives you more of that. So it's one of those where
the algorithm.
The algorithm. This is random lady, I can't remember her name, where she goes out into like the wilderness and like goes on all these faraway journeys and all that stuff. I've never watched the whole thing, but that's the basic premise. But it was interesting. So I started watching, and she says something like, okay, I'm at that point again. I need to just get away from everybody and be completely alone, just me and my dog, and get out there into the wilderness. But it's funny because the entire video is her talking to tens of thousands of people who follow her, maybe hundreds of thousands. And but she's getting away to be alone and away from everybody. So there's something perplexing. And if you use that as a little, like a symbol almost, that's basically what so many people are experiencing, right? It's that in actual fact, I'm alone, meaning like I don't have real relationships with people, and yet I'm connected to so many people. Yeah. In a not just a electronic way, right? That's not really even the primary problem, but in a superficial way.
Right. Well, even like pre-internet, we all know the idea of being alone in a crowd.
True.
And so, yeah, it's definitely not something that's contingent on technology. Technology might have made it worse in some ways, but it's definitely something that transcends the issue of just like how much technology are we surrounding ourselves with. There's like that experience that we've probably all felt at some point or another of just like, yeah, like I'm in a crowd, I'm surrounded by people, and yet I feel so lonely. I feel so unknown, not understood, not seen.
I think so even in our belonging book, you know, it's in our research we looked into that as well, right? About that feeling alone in a crowd, and it's been, you know, studied quite a bit, and they call it belonging uncertainty. But what they say is that like all of us go through this. Like if you go, especially if it's a new crowd, right? Or if you go for Like I guess the best example is like a wedding reception. You don't know people there. You know, you are uncertain about how you fit into that crowd and what you want to do. Mm-hmm. But I don't necessarily think that's I don't necessarily think that equates to loneliness though, because that's just a matter of, you know, it only takes one connection there in that wedding reception for you to now say, okay, I no longer feel alone. So
yeah. I think the real question is whether it's through a crowd or online or TV, it's the question of cheap substitutes for the real thing.
Yeah.
Right? Mm. That's the basic human temptation, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's what they describe in the epidemic of loneliness as a lack of meaningful connections, right?
Right. So like you could be a party goer in college.
Yeah.
And you go to all these parties and you could be very popular or lots of people are enthralled by you, but inside you feel terribly alone. That would be an example of a cheap substitute, because every time you feel alone, you push yourself more into those destructive habits, right? Yeah. But then you end up feeling even more alone.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what's happening with people, where the hours that are being spent, again, another cheap substitute is, you know, I like TV and movies and all that. But it can be a cheap substitute for real living, because instead of actually having those experiences yourself, you get to have the kick, the feeling of those experiences by watching other people do it.
But I'd like to play off of that point when you mentioned meaningful connection, because another example that I think would be very interesting for what we're talking about is when you get somebody who, like two people who are in a relationship, a romantic relationship, and it's clear to at least one of them that it's not working. Let's say the woman realizes that it's not working out, but she doesn't want to say anything, but she has this feeling inside of like, there's not a meaningful connection here. And so we wouldn't necessarily call that a cheap substitute per se in that case. But one thing that I think is common in all the situations, including this one, this is what I thought of it, is it seems that at the heart of loneliness is this feeling that I'm not truly known. I'm not truly seen. Like my ability to communicate myself and for someone else to communicate themselves to me is somehow inhibited or limited. So like whether that be because I'm taking the cheap substitute or because there's a barrier, to the relationship, that seems to be like what's at the heart of it there. Like,
yes. Yeah. The cheap substitute is mainly what we're talking about. There is this phenomenon that I described with the YouTube thing, or on other forms of social media, where you're in a sense, you're constantly connected to maybe more and more people. But then I think the danger of today versus other eras is that this cheap substitute has become more technologically advanced, but it's a cheap substitute that's always been there.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah. No, and I think it's very much unique to our time, just because we never experienced something particularly like this before.
Yeah. Like the rush you can get from you posting something and then all these people liking it.
Yeah.
Is just like,
yeah, it's a cheap substitute.
I mean, that's like the party goer, basically. If you're the life of the party, you may never actually have the incentive, so to speak, to develop true meaningful relationships.
Yeah.
It's kind of like maybe popular people, have it hard, because it's just like sometimes people say that about beautiful people, that they actually have it hard because they get so much automatically.
Yeah.
But then they actually don't get the real stuff. It's
no, that's a great observation. I never really thought of it that way, like the likes and the, all the attention that you're getting. That's really great. I never really thought about that. So
yeah, although I do think, and I'll let it stand here, but I do think that the cheap substitutes that we're seeing today, or even in the past, are really more symptoms than the ultimate cause. Like I think there's something deep down that makes us feel lonely, and these things that these different substitutes are simply the things we reach for to try and medicate it.
Absolutely, because friendship, the kind of friendship that we're talking about in adult life, is hard. It's very difficult. That's what makes us reach for cheap substitutes of any kind. What makes us reach for, alcohol or drugs or whatever. It's like life is hard. Relationships are hard.
Yeah.
If you're doing
hard.
life right.
Yeah, friendships are hard. There's going to be misunderstandings and, fallouts and phases of ups and downs. And, you gotta
And that fact that it's hard is not like something wrong with it, It's that idea that the greater the good, the more difficult it is to attain, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's like Aquinas talks about that. I mean, that's just like part of the law of nature, I guess you can say.
But but there is, exponential benefits too from having, meaningful relationships, and I think, we've talked about this as well of like how our friends help us grow so much. And, I can experience this so much at seminary, just by the fact of having guys, wanting to live in a deep, intimate relationship with Christ and seeing that lived out, in a way inspires me as well. And like, makes me ask the question, what does my relationship with God look like? So I think, there's exponential benefits to friendships as well. And we've all experienced that in our own lives. And definitely. I think the hard work is worth it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, I think one of the big elements of the friendship study was pulling in some of Aristotle's understanding of friendships.
Yeah.
So, Anthony, maybe you could explain that a bit.
No,
to our
I
listeners.
guess like the understanding was that just in general with Aristotle and Augustine was that, like for Aristotle, the friendship was to help you grow in virtue. He saw friendship as a relationship so that it helps you grow in virtue, that you see, like just like what we shared a little bit earlier, like I see you growing in virtue and, I'm inspired to do that. Or, the goal of the friendship is in a way for us to grow in virtue as well.
Right.
So,
or maybe put in even simpler words, like the highest form of friendship is friendship where each of us is becoming a better person. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so for Augustine will take it a step further and say, the goal of friendship is for us to know God. In our relationship, in what I experience in our relationship, in a way is me getting to know the intimacy of God and His love for me, and His openness towards me is what I'm experiencing through your friendship. So yeah, I mean it's very much part. Friendships is very much part of the Christian tradition of who we are, and we've always seen that as such a beautiful part of our Christian journey. Yeah,
I'd be curious about your thoughts about how and if God is essential to a substantial friendship. I mean, as we were talking, that question was coming up in my mind. Yeah, I mean, I guess where I'm coming from with that question is that I was going to say most of the relationships, but I'll just go ahead and say all of the relationships in my life, I've come to encounter my own weaknesses and limitations. There's a limit in the sense of to our natural goodness, in a way. And it's like I can't remember who said this to me years ago, but someone was saying, like, before I got married, I was such a holy person. I love that. I never forget that.
I think I might remember the guy who said it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's like, so you encounter your limits in a real way. You encounter your flaws, basically. And anyway, the question is, I mean, for me, in my life, it's when I start running without God, I start feeling it. And He draws me back to Himself to realize that every relationship is through Him. And that's where, without that, every relationship, no matter what kind, family, friends, any kind, can actually become toxic. It can actually become something that's harmful.
Yeah, one of the, what that brings to mind for me is just in my own life experience. One of my closest friends is not religious. We've been friends for over 10 years, quite a long time. We know each other very well, each other's families, been there for many major milestones in each other's lives, many ups and downs. And he always supported me in my own journey of faith. And he does it because he knows that it makes me a better man. In as much as he understands a better man to be, like as somebody who's not religious, who doesn't really know the Lord personally like that. But I think it brings up an interesting dynamic that in a true, good, like sincere friendship, where there's that rejoicing in the other person, seeking the other person's good, you know, even if one party can't see God for some reason, like he can see his friend and he can see the joy that God brings to his friend. And because he rejoices in what's good for his friend, like he can rejoice in that, like for the sake of his friend. At least that's been my experience of it. And I just think that's very interesting because like God is there, even if one party's not aware. But because at least there's this recognition that like God genuinely like makes my friend's life better. Like I want that for him, like even if it's beyond my understanding. And I just find that very interesting that friendship has this way of being almost, I don't want to use the word evangelistic, but it has this sort of like osmosis effect.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know if you've experienced that either of you.
Because you're both, I mean, from the thing we said about Aristotle, you're both striving for the good, and really it's not for like you said, it's not pickleball, or it's not, I mean, you're striving for the ultimate good.
Yeah.
The ultimate good, which is God, whether that's, I guess in this case, which is beautiful, and thank you for sharing that. I feel like that ultimate good is known implicitly, you know, because if your friend wasn't striving with you for that ultimate good, I don't think you would have a good and meaningful, beautiful friendship. Right. You know what I mean? He's striving for that good. It's just that the mystery of unbelief, I guess, you know, or is that even very good people who are striving for that, striving towards God, somehow may not be able to see that. And that's a whole other question. But yeah.
And then on the reverse side of it too, you know, you can also see two people who might be very religious, let's say, or at least sort of within a religious environment, and yet their friendship might be like so devoid of virtue. So like, and there have been situations like it could be guys in seminary who just kind of commiserate together. It could be priests who just don't really have anything substantial. They just kind of might, I don't know, drink and watch football or something. I'm making this up, but right, you know, it's like it could be people who are actually religious and seeking the Lord, but like the basis of their friendship is kind of rotten or meaningless.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I truly believe friendship is a gift, and you know it's a gift, you know, given to us.
That's a whole nother important dimension.
Yeah, because that's where when you said, you know, the question of God in it, and I think the two things that come to mind was like friendship is a gift. I mean, you can maybe when you met like your friends, you can point out to an instance where, oh yeah, it was like I was standing in a line and I randomly met him, but then but then there's this, you know, it's a grace to continue on that journey, and you know. Right. And you go through ups and downs, and there's a certain grace that is given to you. And so, I do think like it's a gift given to us, and, you know, we put our effort to kind of continue it and maintain it. But even in that effort, you know, like you were sharing, you know, you experience your limitations, and, you know, there's a grace that's given to continue on that journey. So I truly believe it's a gift, and it's a gift given to us to experience God and encounter God in who he is.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's like, I think that the balance between, on the one extreme, if you see friendship as a gift and you don't make any effort, you know, that would be one extreme, obviously. The other one is where you try to you contrive it, you know.
You manufacture a friendship.
Yeah, exactly. You force it, you know, because you're lonely. You know, I mean, really, I mean, genuinely, because you're looking for a friend so much. And we can probably all see this in our own lives. I mean, you're really looking for a friend. So you try to make this person what you're really hoping that this person is.
Yeah.
An idealization, not who they actually are.
Yeah. And I mean, the same thing, you know, these two extremes also exist when people are looking for, you know, to get married or whatever, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, you've got some people who are just like, well, God is going to, especially with religious people, right? It's like, well, I know God is going to provide the right person, so I'm just going to sit here in my room.
Sit and wait.
You know?
Right.
They're going to come knocking at my door. But then you got the other extreme, you know. Right. So the balance is, I think, that something like, yes, it comes as a gift. There's a certain element of surprise to it, but it has to be cultivated. Whatever has to be cultivated, and it's nuanced. I mean, I do think, like, especially today, it's really important for people to put themselves out there more, because we don't have so many of the natural meeting points that perhaps that we used to have as a society.
Absolutely.
Right? A lot of our town squares have moved online.
Exactly.
Like parks,
I mean, exactly. I mean, like, even when I visit, like, my parents' ancestral home in India and stuff like that, there's just a natural being outside, walking around, bumping into people and stuff like that, which is not the norm for most people today. You commute to work or whatever, you come back, or you go to school. So I do think that we need to encourage a culture where there's more collisions, where you're bumping into people, you're getting, chance
creating
encounters,
spaces for that, right?
Yeah.
I always think of the Chicago community night, right? It's just a place where people can just come together.
Right.
The old JY house.
Yeah. At JY Chicago, Jesus Youth Chicago, they have every week they have a community night.
Where
they just have they cook barbecue, but there's nothing really. It's just a place for people to come together. Creating spaces like that, I think, are really important. Especially today. So
and even talking with one of our friends around here one time, I remember we were sharing how sometimes I'll put out a message just saying, like, hey, if anyone wants to come over and just kind of do work study, have some coffee, feel free to come. What's funny is most of the time nobody comes. But the important thing that I've come to realize is not that people come, it's that people know that they have a space. They have a place where they can go and meet.
That's great that you do that. See, I think the reason why more people don't do that is because when nobody comes, they feel rejected.
Absolutely.
And everybody's afraid of that, and so nobody does it.
You
know what I mean? And we just need to be a little more courageous about, like, hey, I'm just going to put it out there. If nobody comes, nobody comes. You know what I mean? And kind of take it lightly and keep moving. That's the thing. I think that first stage is very light. You need maximal collision, so to speak. So you don't give too much weight to if somebody says yes or no. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And also just signal, like, there will be an open door here. Like, whether it's like in that one-to-many context, like with coffee at the house, or if it's just like one-to-one, like maybe like you don't quite land the conversation right with the person when you meet them for the first time, but just to be able to signal, like, okay, well, I hope that we run into each other again, or maybe I'll see you around, like, just signaling, like, there's an open door here, there's an opportunity to, like, re-engage this. If
it's kind of like stages of friendship, right? Like, you get to meet the person, and then you get to interact with them, get to know them a little bit, and then you grow together, based on.
So how does it grow? How does the relationship grow from being an acquaintance or somebody that you hang out with, that you have fun with? I think this would be a question that a lot of people do have, is you're hanging out with people a lot, maybe even. You watch sports together, but how do you take it from there to where there's, like, vulnerability, where there's a true knowing of the other person, that kind of, like, deeper.
There's, like, that threshold crossed of, like, I can share something with
I feel like, especially for men, men tend to get stuck there at the hanging out.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good question. I don't know. I think for me, I'm always like the intuition, your experience, your judgment, what do you kind of sense from the other person? I'm very much, not very much, but like that plays a part for me, for sure. Like, once I get to know that person, I think there's something in me that says, oh yeah, this is a person that'd be like good to hang out with or spend more time with. I think like John Henry Newman's Relative Sense, right? Like our experience, intuition, judgment, trusting that. So I think that would be one for me.
I think, like, I'm not necessarily asking this question, but I think what I'm recognizing when I hit that threshold with a certain friend is, like, this person is trustworthy. Like, I can, trust comes in stages also, but I think that there will be a moment where there's enough evidence in front of me or inside of me to say, like, I can entrust this thing to this person.
I see. When you say entrust this thing,
like this deeper part of me, the deeper part of my life, or something that I want to share, or something I feel, or my experience, or something like that.
So if you feel like this person is trustworthy, which is, I think, another important topic we need to discuss, but if you feel like this person is trustworthy, you share maybe something small to begin, but something that's more personal to you, that's more sacred in a sense to you, you right. communicate that to the other person.
Right, because I think it plays into sort of the opposite of what we were talking about before with the loneliness, like I'm not seen, I'm not understood, I'm not known.
Yeah.
When, there's a friendship growing, then there's this building understanding and awareness that like this person does see me, this person can know me on this level.
That's great.
Yeah. I think, even in our research, we talked about, like, first of all, does the other person also desire, a deeper friendship, and, do they want is there a desire for intimacy and friendship too? So right, I think that has to be like,
it has to be mutual. Yeah. Because if it's not, then you just end up look like you're oversharing.
Yeah. But you won't know that. because it'd be awkward to ask, hey, are you looking for deeper intimacy here?
Yeah. But I think, trustworthiness for sure.
Yeah. I think you have to take a step, and then you see if it's reciprocated or not, right?
Or how. On what level.
Right. Yeah. And then, that's not necessarily the judgment on. It doesn't mean that the person is rejecting you, because not everybody is capable of reciprocating at deeper levels at this time in their life.
So capacity,
there's all of
right?
that. Yeah.
I think even in the life of Jesus in the Gospels, like there's absolute proof that even like love himself, Jesus, like has degrees of friendship. Like you can be perfectly loving, but still have different capacities of like how to engage and receive people.
Yeah.
Because Jesus had best friends, and he also had like people who were like not his friends, but he still loved them absolutely.
Yeah.
But in the context of his life, like there were different contours to his relationships.
Yeah. And I think we should get to that too. That's another important topic. But I think maybe for taking a step, going off of what you said to, okay, you're hanging out with these guys all the time. How do you so what you said, one practical way to do that could be either asking about or sharing about things from the past, childhood, or, there's even just like good memories, beautiful memories, or how you grew up, or what it was like growing up, or what some of the challenges you faced, or whatever. Stories, telling stories is one very kind of little bit easy way to get into that, rather than like a very psychoanalytic thing, like,
right.
Deep inside, I actually feel like, you know what I mean? Like it's like you could just share things about like, even just having conversations about like, so you grew up in, where did you grow up? I forget.
Where did I grow up? Yeah. Orlando.
Oh, Orlando. Very far away. You grew up in Orlando. That's not as interesting. You grew up in India. Like, what was that like? What was the change like coming to, something about the person's story, both taking interest in the other person and also being willing to share. Yeah. No offense to Orlando. I just didn't know.
It's okay.
What was it like growing next to Disney World,
In the House of the Mouse.
Yeah. But some other things that you guys brought up. One is the trustworthiness. This is, I think, one of those things that hopefully we learn. See, like if you have truly negative experiences in friendships, right?
Yeah.
Not the kind that you just are supposed to like, you get a scratch, you keep moving. Not that, but like really negative experiences. Either you can totally recoil and then avoid friends altogether, which is, I think, what happens to people as they get older. I think that's why they become more and more alone. Or you can learn from them, and one of the things to learn from them is how do you determine if a person is trustworthy? I think that is an essential lesson that you must learn through life, or you'll get burned so many times that you'll finally give up in friendship, right? So here's a question: is from your own experiences, how do you assess a person's trustworthiness?
Well, I think right up front, one thing that I think is important to establish is that trust can only be given. It's one way. I can only say I trust you. there's no reciprocal to that. I think that's just important to establish that you can never demand trust.
True.
So I think that's just good to clarify up front as we figure out what we mean when we talk about trustworthiness.
Yeah. So in this case, it's how do you assess when you're whether you should place your trust in someone or not,
right?
And to what extent, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, one of the things I look for, that I've learned to look for, is what do I call it? I guess integrity or consistency of values. Like for example, if somebody says, "Hey, listen, don't tell this to anybody. I was told this in confidence. I really shouldn't be sharing this with you, but I want you to know," and they tell me something violating the secrecy of another person. That to me is a red flag right away.
For sure. Non-confidentiality, right?
Yeah. Like something like that, where it's like,
because the truth, but you're choosing not to follow it.
Yeah. But it's also kind of like, hey, you're my friend, so I'm willing to betray this other person for you. Well, it's just going to be a matter of time before they do the same thing to me.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's this, that kind of, so yeah, that's one of the things.
Yeah. I would say for me too, like gossip is one too, like, going into conversations like he said, she said, those kind of stuff. Like, those are kind of things like for me, it's a little, I don't know if it's a character judgment or not, but it's like, it's probably not a person I'm going to, end up having a deep, intimate friendship with. And
Yeah. I think that, and this is definitely a personal thing, not something that I'd say applies across the board, but I've noticed I tend to struggle when things ride on assumptions and sort of indirect understandings. Because what I find is that when things are misunderstood, and inevitably there's misunderstandings, big or small, it's just part of life and we move past them. But the problem is that when there's a lot of implicit, supposed understanding, and then something kind of goes awry or it gets misunderstood, then like this bitterness has this way of entering in between me and the other person. Or it's like, I think he did that because he doesn't like when I do this. But we never talked about it. It might not actually be a problem.
Yeah.
But there's that growing alienation that comes from the lack of, I won't say clarity. I guess I'll say forthrightness. Like just being able to be like, this is where I stand on these things. And that doesn't have to be like a handwritten statement that's handed, but just simply like whether it's through conversation or through clear action, something I can point to that shows like, oh, okay, like this is what this person is thinking and feeling about me. And like that gives me clarity around their actions so that, if I don't understand something, or even just having the freedom to be like, I didn't understand when you did that. What did that mean? At least then it prevents that bitterness. Because I think the other thing that I think is a major inhibitor to trustworthiness for me is if I see that a person is unforgiving. And a lot of times when somebody is very bitter, there's a lot of unforgiveness as well.
Yeah, bitterness probably, I could say bitterness, yeah.
Yeah.
I think whatever it is, I would say every person at some point in their life should sit down and think about what matters to me in terms of, because the thing is, when you're really excited about a prospective friendship, you just like forget everything else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like falling in love.
Yeah, it's like falling in love. And this is what happens, where people end up in destructive relationships, or toxic relationships, where like, for example, like maybe, especially if the person has like a personality disorder or something like that, where, it's just like apologize, and then offend again and apologize and offend again. And, that's just one example. There's so many. So I think at some point everyone should think about, okay, what makes a person trustworthy to me? And again, it's not about being unforgiving or anything like that, but having a sense of that, I think, would be important. And then you brought up this important point about, hey, we don't have to be best friends with everyone. And
Probably can't.
yeah, you definitely can't. And this is maybe especially surprising for many of our beloved extroverts, because they just don't tend to think like that. It's kind of like, yeah, I'm friends. Oh yeah, I'm friends with that person. Yeah, I'm friends with that person. And sometimes the danger there is that you don't end up investing in or cultivating those close friendships that you have sufficiently.
Yeah.
Because you kind of treat all as equal, and then you allow just whoever happens to be in your vicinity, to get your time and your interest and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's maybe not as conscious. So I don't know. Is there anything you wanted to say more about the degrees of friendship and what that looks like?
Yeah, I actually find it helpful to have friendships of different degrees, personally speaking. Meaning I don't see every friendship as sort of a progress bar towards a finish line of now we've achieved maximal intimacy of our friendship. Rather, I think friendships need to find a natural landing point, and that'll be at different places for different people.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And I actually like that. I appreciate that because, for instance, I might have a friend where if I'm going through something serious and I want to talk about it, I know who to go to. There might also be times where I'm going through something serious and I really don't want to talk about it and I'm not ready to talk about it. But I have friends that I can be around who aren't going to poke that bear, and I'm not imposing on them in some level. So there are people who can receive me at that deeper level when I'm ready to share it. There are also people who can receive me without me needing to go to that deeper level. And I think those are both important, actually. Yeah. It's helpful.
I think that's beautiful, right? That clarity of if I was thinking if you have that in your mind, these are the people I go for, and having that clarity of who I find intimacy with, who I find deeper friendships with. I think just having that in your mind itself is so helpful. Yeah.
It's liberating. What I find is that, because, sometimes I'll be working with somebody or whatever, whether in spiritual direction or just as a friend or mentor or whatever. And it's they're in this stressful situation because they keep trying to make it work. And then when you let them know, which, again, it's always easy to give advice, so it's hard to receive it. But it's just you don't have to be friends with that person. It's oh yeah. It's all of a sudden it's just wait, I don't have to make this work. You find the land, the what you call it?
Natural landing point or something.
The natural landing point. It's just hey, where is this kind of at a nice equilibrium where this is where it's meant to be.
And being okay with that too.
Being okay with that.
I think that was really beautiful. You're okay with that. You're not striving to make this something that
pushing everything to the maximum. Because ultimately the goal is we just want to love people the best way we can. And love is something that is absolute, but not necessarily relationships and friendships. And we love people completely, but the contours of that, the level that love looks like, the level of engagement, that's all very relative to the relationship. And that's okay. Sometimes, there are also people where the best way to love some people is to not have a friendship with them, or even to really talk to them much at all. It might be that you're engaging with each other is really not a good thing for either of you, but you still have this duty to love them. And that can be an absolute, but that doesn't necessarily translate over to having a friendship, or a deep friendship, even. So one more topic I wanted to bring up that I think is kind of an interesting topic I heard from a psychiatrist named Dr. Alok something. But anyway, he brought up this interesting concept because he works a lot with especially millennial Gen Z patients, the chronically online crowd, my joke. And he brought up this interesting concept. I won't go through everything he said, but what he left me with was I realized that there's a difference between what we might call friendship building versus what I'll call friendship maintaining. Not in a bad sense of it's in maintenance mode, back burner, passive. I don't mean like that. But if I could call making a friend a skill, I know that's probably not the proper word, but let's say that the ability to reach out and establish a new connection, and then that connection becoming a friend. That's one ability or skill, if you want to use that word. But then maintaining the connection you've established is actually a separate ability. It's a separate ability. And the reason he brought this up was because a lot of people today don't have or have lost that ability. And it's part of the reason why many people are becoming lonely. It's part of the reason anyway. He pointed to the example, like if you wind back the clock a few generations, you mentioned India before, and it's a great example. In these very communal cultures where, there are some people like who like might not have even seen an airplane until they were like late in life. Like they never left home. They stayed within their communities for most of their lives. And so did everyone around them. And so they really didn't need to do much consciously in terms of maintaining connections, because you'd go out and see your neighbor, your cousin, your distant family member, the person you see at church, like whatever. That was all very accessible and easy. And even in America, we had that a lot for quite a long time, whether it was in urban communities or even suburban communities. And then something started to shift maybe about 2 generations back in America, where people began to move a lot for work and to like pick up their lives and take them somewhere else. And they grew up in a context where that maintaining relationships was something implicit. But then they moved into a context where that didn't really happen naturally anymore. And the consequence of that was that they didn't realize they needed to do it for themselves. But then the further consequence was that when they had children, they didn't realize that was something they had to impart to their children. So it's not their fault, but they didn't realize that's something that they needed to impart. So anyway, tying back to like what the psychiatrist was saying, he sometimes will ask his clients, like, when you got invited to your friends' birthday parties as a kid, did your parents tell you to like make a birthday card for the neighborhood kid whose party you were going to? Or like when people came to your birthday party, did you write them thank you notes? That's an example. It's not like an objectively superior thing to do. But his point was like, those are things that maintain connections. And many young people today we're not really the best at maintaining connections. So I actually think that this is a really understated and sort of something that we're not really fully aware of yet, that I actually think factors pretty significantly into the whole conversation on building friendships.
Oh, it's huge.
Because there are many people who like, they're like, whether they're extroverts or just really charismatic or whatever, they're great at making connections, and then they'll die in 6 months. And like, it happens.
Yeah. Or like, even with people who are very close friends, when we had our friendship seminar some years ago, again, I was intrigued by the fact that the younger participants generally felt like they had more friends, and the older the person was, I felt like they had less close friends. And so I asked, I can't remember a couple, but I've noticed this pattern, like, did you ever have a close friend like that? And it's like, oh yeah, I had we were really close friends and everything. What happened? Well, kind of like what you're saying. Oh, I moved. They moved, and then that's it. Right. So because when you're living in the traditional village that you talked about, it's a great point. You can take it for granted that you are going to bump into the person, that they're going to stop by, or that you're going to see them at church, or you're going to whatever.
But you're going to go to each other's birthday parties.
Exactly. So the friendship can continue to grow. Now you have to be conscious and intentional about the fact that, hey, this is a friend of mine, and I need to set aside time to keep in touch, visit, maybe take a flight and go visit, and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot more intentional.
Yeah. And that's very new.
Especially when you consider friendship as a gift.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't take it for granted. Like, hey, wow, I was given this great gift to this amazing friend, but as a priest, I got a new assignment, so it's over. It's just like,
right, I'm gone.
Yeah.
But I think another factor in this maintaining friendships thing is it's also learning to, I guess I'll say, learning the art of making new memories. I remember that I had some friends from college days where every time we got together, and we weren't doing this in a bad way, but like every time we got together, we just ended up talking about our college days.
Mm-hmm.
And then now they're both married with kids. One of us is still working on it, but when we got together, the five of us, like, I just remembered one time we were all sitting at dinner. Their wives were there too, and we just started going to remember when, and their wives were just kind of like smiling and nodding, and they were enjoying it, but they had no input into the discussion.
Yeah.
And I caught that, and something in me just like something clicked, and I just remembered saying, you know what, guys, for the rest of this conversation, we're not allowed to talk about college. We're going to talk about where we are now in our lives, and like figure out something from there. And we had the most beautiful, sincere conversation we had in years. We talked about like our hopes and dreams for the future, what we wanted for our family lives, and like so many great things came out of just like, hang on, let's not live in the past. Because that's also part of the art of maintaining a friendship, is like carrying it forward, like carrying it along, like
it's beautiful. Not
just living in a time capsule, because then it's nostalgia, it's the friendship for what it was, not what it is.
That's great. Yeah. Great point. Well, we're probably about wrapping up, I suppose. I do want to say that don't give up on friendship. I think that's an important part of our message. I mean, from the different things we've said. I mean, it can be challenging, and there can be ups and downs within a given relationship, and you might pass through different friendships. I think there's a weird mystery about friendships. Like, you might look back at your life, like maybe when you were in high school, or, and you're like, wow, I had a really good friend, and I'm very grateful for that friend. That friend played a big role in my life, even though we're not friends anymore. And there's a mystery to that too, so it's just like through all of the messiness of it, as we walk with the Lord, we trust that. I mean, it's all something beautiful. It's part of our life story, and we shouldn't give up on, welcoming new friendships where they come up, and deepening, maintaining the friendships that we have.
Yeah, beautiful.
As we wrap up, Anthony, do you want to share with our listeners where they can find more about the Institute for Excellence project on friendship?
Yeah. Well, it's amorischristi.org /ACIE. But we'll put it in the show link as well, the friendship paper and everything. Thanks, Chris, for the shout out. Appreciate it.
And thank you to all of our listeners for enjoying this conversation with us.
All right. Peace.
All right. God bless.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inspirit podcast. Inspirit is an initiative of Amoris Christi, an apostolate dedicated to lay spiritual formation. For more information and to keep up to date, you can visit our website at amorischristi.org and follow us on social media.